A young, arrogant mayor wants to demolish an old library that holds the town's war memories. He doesn't expect that just 5 words from an elderly, forgotten veteran would bring the entire groundbreaking ceremony to a standstill. When the past steps into the present, who dares to turn away? By the end of this story, you'll understand why. This land remembers its guardians. In the fall, Willow Creek has a very particular kind of light. Golden, not too bright, but just enough to cover everything in a layer of time's dust. The maple leaves lining the main road begin to turn deep red, falling slowly, almost hesitantly, as if reluctant to leave the old branches, mourning something no one quite remembers anymore. The Willow Creek Public Library sits quietly at the far end of Main Street, next to an old radio repair shop and a long-closed cookie store. Its red brick facade and moss-stained tiled roof greet visitors with a heavy wooden door that groans with every push. No one remembers exactly when it was built, but in the early years after World War II, the townspeople once flocked there in droves to borrow books, learn to read, and exchange news. Now, most people pass by just to grab coffee from the new cafe next door. Teenagers hang out 20 miles away at the shopping mall, and the library stands silent, like a forgotten witness. Chuck Norris comes to the library very early, before the sun has even crested the pine hills to the east. He drives an old, faded blue pickup truck, whose back tires squeal when turning into the dirt patch behind the library. People in town know of him, but not much about him. Some say he's a retired carpenter. Others claim he was once in the military, disappeared for years, and just recently returned. But to most, he's simply the man who dusts the books. He holds no official position at the library, doesn't draw a salary, but he shows up every day. Always wore a dusty, earth-toned canvas jacket, worn-out jeans, and scuffed boots. His face is rugged and angular. His chin always clean-shaven. His eyes a cold grey blue, calm, yet piercing like a frozen lake. Chuck never speaks first, but he always answers in a short and exact manner. When a teenager once asked, "What do you even do here?" he simply replied, "Keep the books from molding." But in truth, what he does goes far beyond that. He dusts each spine by hand, rearranges the shelves into better order, though no one asks him to. He checks handwritten logbooks, long ignored by modern library software. Each morning before opening, he kneels to clean the hardwood floor and pick up scraps of paper children left behind the day before. No one requests it, but he acts as if it's a sacred duty. It is as if within those books, something lost is still waiting to be reclaimed. Agnes Harrow is the head librarian, an elderly woman, her hair pure white tied neatly into a bun. She moves slowly, slightly hunched, her left leg aching when the weather turns cold. She and Chuck don't talk much, but there's a quiet understanding between them. Every morning, when she unlocks the front door, Chuck is already there. At shelf 4, the one holding wartime historical records. She nods. He nods back. That's enough. Sometimes in the late afternoon, Agnes brews 2 cups of ginger tea, one for herself, one placed quietly at the corner reading table. She never invites, he never thanks her, but he always sits there, sipping in silence, eyes on the sunlight slanting through the window. Once she softly asked, "You've been very far away, haven't you?" Chuck replied without turning, "Far enough that no one remembers the way back." Library staff records list Agnes as a medical doctor. Few know she once served in the U.S. Army Field Medicine in the late 1960s. Not in a hospital, but in a mobile aid station near the Laotian border, a place that received dozens of casualties daily, and she was the last person to touch those dying soldiers, not to save them, but to hold their hands until the end. In the desk drawer she keeps a faded tin box full of handwritten letters from soldiers or their families, thanking her for being there when no one else would. Come close. She never shows them off. But Chuck once saw the box when she dropped the lid one rainy afternoon. He picked it up for her, his hand trembling slightly. "These are people I once kept from dying," she whispered. "And people you never let fall," Chuck replied. Nothing more was said. At the back of the library is a rarely visited archive room. Inside, Agnes and Chuck guard a treasure few modern folks care for. Records of Willow Creek's veterans from 1942 to the present. Faded photos, yellowing citations, dog tags, wartime letters, and even the thin journal of a soldier who died saving a friend in the Vietnam swamp. Chuck examines each piece like a man searching for old friends. Sometimes he stands for a long time in front of a black and white photo, young soldiers grinning in red clay. His gaze always lands on one. No one knows what he's thinking, but after that day, he began cleaning more meticulously around the military display area. To him, those objects are alive, still waiting to be remembered. One afternoon in mid-October, with a faint orange sky and a distant train whistle echoing from the central station, Chuck was organizing files for the 1st Recon Battalion when the library door slammed shut. That was unusual. Agnes never closed the door so harshly, and the library rarely had visitors this late. Chuck turned, slowly walking into the main hall. 3 sharply dressed young men stood in the reading room, suits, silk ties, polished shoes. One was speaking loudly to Agnes. "We made it clear in the letter. You have no right to withhold public property when you're no longer a legal employee. You passed retirement age 12 years ago." Agnes stood still. No defense, no bowing her head. Another man, lawyer-like, added, "We're sealing the archives. All paper records will be digitized and stored online. Any sentimental items, medals, letters, helmets, will be considered for disposal if deemed educationally irrelevant." Chuck said nothing, but his hands clenched. The words sentimental, disposal, and outdated. They sliced through old memories like dull knives. The last man stepped forward, the youngest of the 3, hair slicked back. Mayor Ryan Tate was newly elected on the New Willow Creek No Need for the Past campaign. "I know this is difficult for you," he said with feigned sympathy, "but the town needs progress. The new generation doesn't live off war memories. They want playgrounds, malls, strong Wi-Fi, not musty books about who died for what." Silence. Chuck stepped from the shadows, stood tall. Age had not shrunk him. His gaze made Tate flinch for half a second. "War isn't idealism," Chuck said calmly. "It's a scar the survivors carry forever. But those memories are what let you stand here judging without a gun to your head." Tate scoffed. "Who are you to say that? The janitor? I'm someone who didn't get to come home, but survived, thanks to people like her." Agnes trembled. Not from fear, but because it was the first time in decades someone acknowledged her work with the seriousness it deserved, not as a volunteer nurse from the past. Tate pulled out his phone, turning away. "Fine. If you resist, we'll involve the authorities. This property will be reclaimed." Chuck didn't respond. He bent down and picked up a letter that had fallen from the disturbed archive pile. An old brown envelope, edges curled, ink smudged on one side. "To my wife, Agnes Harrow. If I don't return, know that you were the last thing I remembered during the bombardment. Forever yours, Colonel Matthew Harrow." Chuck quietly slipped the letter into his jacket pocket. His hand trembled. Not out of fear, but because of an old promise never fulfilled. "Majestate," he said softly, "you once kept me alive. Now it's my turn to keep your memory from being erased." That evening, the sun seemed to linger longer than usual, watching an old soldier, for the first time in many years, rise once again. 3 days after Ryan Tate and his legal team's visit, the doors of the Willow Creek Public Library were officially sealed shut with a brand new chain. Gleaming, cold, carrying the very message it meant to send. A plastic sign was taped to the entrance in bold red letters. Temporarily closed for renovation pursuant to Town Order 9/RT. No one in town really read the fine print. The younger folks didn't care. The older ones, if they passed by, only shook their heads and kept walking. No one asked Agnes. No one asked Chuck. The library had been erased from Willow Creek's development plans. In its place, a flashy banner now stood across the street, showcasing renderings of a community culture and recreation center, with fountains, a play area, a modern conference hall, and a glowing lead wall of honor to replace the veterans' room. Everything was bright, clinical, polished, like a blueprint where memory had no place. Agnes didn't return to the library again. After that day, she spent her time on the porch swing, her eyes gazing far down the street where she had spent half her life, protecting each book, each file, like veins preserving the pulse of time. Chuck still came by every morning, but he could no longer get inside. He would just sit on the long bench beside the library wall, holding a cup of cold coffee, his eyes fixed on the locked door. He sat there for hours, not speaking, not calling, not writing. But if anyone passed by and looked closely, they'd see his eyes scanning each face, as if searching for a name lost among people who no longer remembered each other. One rainy afternoon, Chuck drove up to the North Hill to a small house hidden behind a stand of pine trees. The roof was covered in broken moss and the wooden door was sagging off its hinges. He knocked 3 times. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, a raspy voice came from inside. "No visitors, unless you're Death." Chuck chuckled. "If I were Death, I wouldn't knock." The door cracked open. A gaunt man with thinning white hair and a beard like a bird's nest peered out. His eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "Chuck Norris?" "Paul Knox." "Damn, thought you were dead." "Almost, but not yet." "Come in." "Got whiskey?" They sat at a wooden table in a room that smelled of mouldy paper and tobacco. Paul Knox, once a gunnery sergeant and artillery ace, now lived alone, avoiding the noise of the world, clinging only to fragmented memories and a worn-out wooden prosthetic leg. "Why you here?" "The library was shut down." "Slow. They're erasing the veterans' records too." Paul tossed back his drink. "Then let 'em. Who cares?" Agnes was humiliated, pushed aside. No one stood up. This time, Paul didn't drink. He slowly set the glass down. "She still has that letter. She never let it go. Matthew Harrow saved my life. You're not the only one." Silence. Cold. "Do we have anyone left?" Paul asked, confessing that he had thought about giving up long ago. Chuck reached into his jacket and pulled out an old leather notebook. On the first page, in crooked handwriting, "If anyone ever comes back, call C." He turned the pages. Names, addresses, notes. Left leg amputee, mild dementia, in nursing home, still keeps dog tags. Paul read and sighed. "We've got a few." "A few is enough." 2 days later, Chuck was on the road from dawn till dusk. He drove through back roads to the town's forgotten edges, a small house with a tattered American flag on the porch, a nursing home where a retired Air Force officer hadn't left his room in a decade but could still recite a 1971 radio call sign, a farm where an old man lived with 4 dogs and a metal trunk full of war memorabilia. When Chuck knocked and introduced himself, no one asked why. They just stared at him for a long moment, as if something long lost had finally returned. Then they nodded. Some raised their hands. Some teared up. No words needed. By the evening of the 3rd day, Chuck returned to the library and sat on the old bench by the wall. He laid before him a new list, handwritten, clear, 12 names, 12 people, 12 pasts, once thought buried. Beside each name he marked a small tick. He looked at the temporarily closed sign, then across the street at the RYANT Community Center billboard, its LED lights blinking. "They'll wipe out everything we once believed was the soul of this town," he muttered. But then he noticed something else. At the bottom left corner of the billboard was a line. "Groundbreaking ceremony, Saturday, 9 o'clock, IMM, live statewide broadcast." His eyes locked onto the last 3 words, "live statewide." His lips tightened, and for the first time in days his eyes lit up, not with anger, not with regret, but with resolve. Wednesday morning, 4 days before the groundbreaking ceremony. Chuck left home while mist still clung to the roads. The air was sharp with autumn chill, soaking through his worn-out canvas jacket. In his hand was a folded, creased list, its contents clearer than any ink. Team 7, Operation Elkhorn, Eastern Europe, 1981. The first name was boxed in. Tate Walker, signals operator. He drove to the old bakery owned by Mr. Foster, where the town's last public payphone still stood. Chuck inserted a coin and dialed the faded number. Ring, ring. A robotic voice. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Chuck squinted, not surprised. He circled the name and added, "Tried, no contact." Next name, James Rabbit Delaney, marksman. He dialed the Nebraska Veterans Association. A solemn female voice answered. "Mr. Delaney passed last year, lung cancer. He left a letter for someone named Chuck. Is that you?" Chuck paused. "Yes." "Wait. I can mail it." "No need," he replied. "Can you read it instead?" After a moment of hesitation, she read, slowly, "Chuck, if you're still alive and still keep your spine straight like you did back then, know that I made peace with myself. Don't let small men tear down the house we built with our blood. Rabbit." Chuck nodded. No one saw it, and for the first time that day he smiled. That afternoon Chuck headed southwest to a mobile home in the middle of a wide empty field. A rickety sign by the gate read, "E. Callahan, retired postal." He didn't knock, just stood there, waiting. After a while, the door creaked open. A woman in her 60s, silver-haired and cane-wielding, looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a dry, raspy voice, "Chuck Norris, Callahan, you're still alive. We all are, if we still remember." She opened the door wider. No more words. They sat across from each other at a chipped kitchen table, the ceramic mugs worn and cracked. Chuck laid the list on the table. Callahan scanned the names, her lips tightening at each red line. "I only stayed in touch with one. Jorge Mendez, sniper, but he lives in the woods now, no phone, no mail. Does he still remember my name? And says it when he's drunk. That's enough." By evening, Chuck stopped at a gas station built atop an abandoned military airstrip. There he found Malik Stone Jackson, a slim black man, 2 fingers missing, changing oil under a lifted truck. When Malik saw Chuck approaching, he grinned. "Still got that face, still got those eyes like they see straight into you." They clasped shoulders, no greetings needed. Malik opened his trunk and pulled out a wooden box. Inside was a carefully folded old uniform, medals still pinned. "I kept it for the last day," Malik said. "Saturday might be that day. Still fits. Well enough. Then just say the word. Saturday morning. 9. But come early. I'll shine my boots tonight." Malik grinned. That night, Chuck sat in his kitchen. The yellow light cast long shadows over his weathered face. On the table lay an old photo album. One picture, his old unit, smiling amid a shell-blasted camp. On the back, a handwritten line, smudged by time. "We don't abandon each other, not in war, not in peace." He folded the photo and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, then pulled out his phone. Dialed a strange area code. Ring, ring. "Who is this?" came a gravelly voice. "Chuck Norris." Long silence. "Address?" Chuck read it out. "Saturday. No invite needed, just come." "Understood." No farewell, no ceremony, just another man awakened after 30 years. The next morning, Chuck went to the post office. He sent 7 handwritten letters, sealed with red wax. Each envelope bore the same inscription. "We're not done yet." No names, but everyone receiving one would understand. Friday, one day before the groundbreaking. Willow Creek buzzed with an unusual energy. Workers erected barricades around the old library. Power drills whirred. Bright orange tape was pulled taut. A plywood stage took shape out front. A truck offloaded audio gear. The local TV station's crew was already setting up, testing mics and lighting. Mayor Ryan Tate stood near the base of the stage, chewing gum, hands in pockets, expression brooding like a man burdened with visionary purpose. Beside him, 2 young aides, one holding a clipboard, one filming everything with a ready phone. "Tomorrow kicks off the statewide expansion campaign," Tate said, loud enough for those around to hear. "We're not just starting construction, we're telling the whole state. Willow Creek doesn't live in the past anymore." A middle-aged woman walked by, holding a shopping bag. She muttered under her breath, "The past isn't something that lives. It's what helps us remember who we are." Tate heard. He didn't turn around, just smirked. Across town, inside a small wooden house nestled between 2 ancient maples, Agnes Harrow sat at her window, fingertips brushing over old letters. Her face looked paler than usual. One thin hand hovered over the tin box that held the fragments she once vowed never to open again. Chuck arrived by late afternoon. He didn't knock, just stood at the porch, as if she'd been expecting him. Agnes opened the door slowly. Her pace is unchanged, but her eyes were clear, unblinking. "How many will come?" "I don't know," Chuck replied. "Do you think this will stop Tate?" "No," Chuck said, "but it'll make sure he never walks the same again." She nodded softly, then turned inside. When she returned, she held a faded photograph. Colonel Matthew Harrow, in full uniform, chest full of medals, eyes bright, smile proud. She handed it to Chuck. "You were the only one he believed would survive." "And I'm the only one who did," Chuck murmured. "Then prove to him it wasn't for nothing." He folded the photo gently and tucked it into the breast pocket over his heart. The sunset hit his face, illuminating every weathered crease like etched stone. Like time could no longer wear down what was coming. That night, in a modest upstairs room at the Eastern Town nursing home, 3 elderly men gathered. One was missing a leg. One was in a wheelchair. The third had gnarled hands that trembled but still wore a soldier's watch on his wrist. Malik Stone Jackson entered carrying a wooden crate. Inside were folded uniforms, polished shoes, and sun-faded military caps. He gently laid them on the table and began unpacking. "I don't know who can still fit in these," he chuckled. One of the old men replied, "We don't need them to fit, we just need to wear them, so others will remember." Outside the window, the wind rustled through the trees. Insects chirped their old rhythms, like the forgotten cadence of marching boots. From a neighboring room, a fellow veteran stepped in, leaning on a cane. He spoke only one line. "Word is, Chuck Norris has awakened." Everyone turned. No one needed to say a thing. They knew tomorrow wasn't just a ceremony. Saturday morning, 7:00 a.m. Willow Creek felt no honking, no announcements. But from narrow alleys and front porches they emerged, men and women in aged uniforms, old medals, weathered jackets. Some walked with canes, some wheeled themselves forward, some had no legs at all. They didn't march, but every step had direction, pinned to their clothes. Purple hearts, unit patches, ribbons that hadn't seen daylight in years. Each person carried a story, and every story had returned for one shared reason, because silence had been disrespected. 8:30 AW. The stage was set. A large sign read, "Grand opening, Ryan Tate Community Exchange Center." Folding chairs were lined up for VIPs. Cameras rolled. Microphones were tested. A suited MC whispered commands over the sound system. Mayor Ryan Tate took the stage in a black suit and red tie. Holding a pre-written speech, he scanned the crowd and offered his trademark grin. Our town deserves a modern, dynamic future, free from what holds us back. A few clapped. Some nodded, but most remained silent. He continued, "Today we break ground, not just on a building, but on a new way of life, where history doesn't confine us, innovation uplifts us." He raised the ceremonial scissors, preparing to cut the ribbon. A single footstep broke the moment. Heavy, measured, alone. No one spoke, but everyone turned. From the far end of the street they came, one by one. Veterans, elderly, scarred, proud, wearing old service coats, medals pinned, boots dusted off. Their eyes, not old. Their walk, not for show. Leading them, Chuck Norris. He wore his army green jacket. Silver badges gleamed on his chest. In his right hand, a folded photograph of Colonel Harrow. In his left, a faded piece of silk once tied to a dying comrade's wrist. Chuck said nothing. The crowd parted naturally as he walked up the steps. He faced Ryan Tate. She looked him in the eye, then turned to the crowd. Steady, unshaken. He said 5 words. "This land remembers its guardians." And the world froze. A young boy standing next to his father saluted. A woman wiped her tears. An older man pulled a neatly folded flag from his jacket. One citizen clapped, then another, then more. The clapping built like a tide. Not loud, but deep, like a memory coming back after being buried for decades. Ryan Tate stood stunned. He held the scissors but couldn't raise them. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Cameras turned, not toward him, but toward Chuck and the veterans. Behind Chuck, 12 more veterans stepped forward. No introductions, no speeches, only presence, only memory. A silence fell. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that makes every other sound feel out of place. A flag waved faintly. The coffee cup dropped and rolled slowly across the tiles. Chuck didn't move. He didn't need to. His face didn't rage. His shoulders didn't droop. He stood like only those who faced death and kept their soul. Behind him, Moore stepped forward. Malik Stone, Jackson, his wooden leg tapping, clack, clack. Callahan, her hair white as chalk, still wearing the armband she used during the Angola crisis. A Marine in a pressed uniform, bronze star on his chest, now tarnished, bronze black. Each one is a piece of living history. Each presence cracking the polished logic of that modern ceremony. Tate froze, scissors still in hand, but now irrelevant. Whispers spread. It's them. Real soldiers? They came back. Is that Chuck Norris? Cameras slowly zoomed in on wrinkled faces, tired eyes that had once watched friends die. Now they stared down something else. Oblivion. A 10-year-old girl tugged her mother's hand. "Mummy, why are they wearing old soldier clothes?" The mother crouched and whispered, "Because they remember." And then it happened. Applause. Slow. Measured. A Korean War veteran in the back started it. Then another. And another. The applause wasn't loud, but it spread, like ripples across forgotten names. Tate blinked. He turned to a cameraman below the stage. "Cut the feed. Pause everything. We need to revise the script." But no one listened. No cameras shut off. No microphones muted. The story had moved on, and Tate was no longer its lead. One younger veteran, Corporal Jenkins, saluted Chuck, then faced the crowd. "We're not here to stop your building. We're here to remind you. This place was held by blood and sweat, not by slogans and budgets." No one objected. No one dared. From the crowd, Agnes Harrow appeared, pushed in her wheelchair by a young man. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, holding the tin box. Chuck stepped down and approached her. She opened the lid. Inside was a letter from Colonel Harrow, the husband who never came home. She handed it to Chuck. He returned to the stage. He unfolded the paper and read aloud, voice like rolling thunder from a distant ridge. "If I don't return, let others remember for me. If I don't survive, let the sacrifice not be buried. And if anyone ever tries to forget us, show them we're still here, even in silence." Another silence followed. No one dared disturb. After that day, no one mentioned the groundbreaking again. The headlines changed. Veteran silence may be at Willow Creek ceremony. Chuck Norris returns. The last of Operation Elkhorn. 5 words that stopped a town. Ryan Tate vanished from public view. 2 weeks later, his office issued a statement. Veteran development projects paused for community reassessment. No lawsuits. No protests. Just presence. And 5 unanswerable words. This land remembers its guardians. Willow Creek's autumn passed slowly that year. No one said exactly why, but something in the air had changed. People began to slow down as they passed the old library. Some even stopped. A few placed their hands on its brick walls as if to apologize. 3 weeks later, workers returned, but not to demolish. They cleaned the windows, repainted the doors, removed the closure sign. And on a quiet Monday morning, a new brass plaque was bolted to the entrance. Harrow Memorial Library, for those who remembered when others forgot. No ribbon cutting, no flowers, no cameras, but everyone who walked by knew that name belonged. Chuck didn't come every morning anymore. He stepped back, leaving the memory-keeping to younger hands. But every Saturday, at 5:00 p.m. sharp, he returned. Sat on the long bench beside the library's east wall, under a tree that shaded just enough from the sun. A young boy, the same one who saluted during the ceremony, now cleaned the windows each Monday. Unpaid. He just liked doing it. And afterward, he'd stand quietly in front of the large framed photo inside. The veterans on that day. No poses, no slogans, just standing. In the back of the library, the veteran archive had expanded into its own room. The quiet room. Dim golden lighting. Letters. Dog tags. Medals. Old photos are labeled in Agnes's own handwriting. Visitors came. A son searching for his father's story. A veteran returning from exile. A student writing a thesis on loyalty after war. They didn't need to understand everything. They just needed to sit. Read a letter. Feeling name. That was enough. Agnes still sat on her porch swing, now with a soft blanket over her knees, and a warm mug of ginger tea. Her face hadn't aged, but her eyes grew brighter. She was invited to speak at that year's high school commencement. The whole auditorium stood as she entered. Not for her fame, but for all the things she never boasted about. She didn't speak of war. She spoke of silence. At times, no one stood up. And the moment, finally, someone did. In her place, every last Sunday of the month, a group of elders met at the library. No uniforms, just clean shirts, simple clothes, sitting at the round table. They didn't call it a reunion. They called it night watch, like the old days. One sleeps, one guard. Chuck always arrived first, carried black coffee, a notebook and a dull pencil. Some days no one spoke. They just listened to the ticking clock, to the wind at the window. Other days, stories flowed. About near death in Germany, about a soldier named Lucky who didn't make it, about a letter that never got mailed. Each meeting ended the same way. They placed their hands on each other's shoulders, lightly but firmly. One morning, a young soldier walked through the library door. Fresh uniform, buzzed haircut, trembling. He stood before Chuck. It's shy. I've heard about you, sir. I'm deploying soon. My first time. Chuck looked at him, nodded. You scared? The young man asked. Yes, Chuck answered. How do you stay strong? Chuck paused, then said, remember who helped you stand, and be ready to stand for someone else when it's your turn. The young man nodded deeply, then sat next to Chuck. Said nothing more. They just sat, watching the leaves fall again. That year the town erected a new memorial, simple, a small stone, black granite, no flare, no spotlight, just a few Scylla words. They didn't ask to be remembered, but we chose to. Behind it, a long oak bench. On the left armrest, a single engraved line. This land remembers its guardians. And everyone who sat there knew that wasn't a reminder. It was a promise. The end.